am Valentina Flores, and this is the Ctrl-Alt-Secure podcast where we talk about all things cybersecurity. And today we have a really cool guest with us, Marc Rubinaccio. We've met at a bunch of conferences before and kind of in the industry, and he just has a really unique perspective and insight into cybersecurity. So wanted to bring you on today, Marc, to just talk about some of your many areas of expertise. So I'll let you start if you want to tell us about your background and your current role.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Valentina. I appreciate you having me on. To kind of kick things off, my background has basically always been in cybersecurity. Ever since my first job in retail, I got interested in computers by selling them at Best Buy and then learning how to be a geek at the Geek Squad desk. From there, I went to school for computer science, where I got into programming and ended up transitioning into more of a security specialty. I started working in a data center doing incident response and studying pen testing techniques on my overnight shifts. Eventually, I did get an opportunity to work as the second pen tester for an audit firm, where I worked as a penetration tester for a couple of years. And with barely any guidance, I basically learned on the job, performing network and web application pen testing, social engineering engagements, and eventually getting a couple of security certifications along the way. It was at that time that the PCI Council required that assessors needed 2 security certifications to be a qualified security assessor. And at the company that I was working for, they just needed another auditor at the time. So at that point, I started shadowing PCI audits and then eventually got my QSA and was a qualified security assessor for a few years there. Currently, I'm part of the compliance team at SecureFrame. Compliance consists of 4 of us, and we all come from different audit backgrounds. Myself with a background in PCI. What we do at SecureFrame is we build all of the frameworks in the platform. We provide compliance support to all of our customers. We work with product to make sure the right features are being built. And we even work with sales as compliance sales engineers. And we work with partnerships to make relationships like ours, making sure that they're flourishing and our shared customers are happy. So with my experience that I've had at my previous firms and what I've learned over the years, it's all culminating into my work here at SecureFrame.
Yeah, and not many compliance experts that we talk to have that pen testing background, and that makes you so uniquely qualified to talk about this stuff. And compliance and cybersecurity are so intertwined now. The vast majority of people that come to Red Sentry for pen testing are doing it because of compliance. And as leaders, sometimes we kind of want to shy away from compliance talks because it's just a little overwhelming sometimes. But I think it's important to have you on here and just dive into some of these compliance questions and talk about it a little bit more. So I guess just as a general idea, like what's going on in compliance right now? I know a lot of stuff's kind of shifting and evolving.
Yeah, compliance is like busier than ever, it seems like. So many frameworks are recently going through changes and have gone through changes. For example, PCI 4.0 is improving requirements around authentication, application security, and forcing the customers to manage their own scope. Frameworks like ISO 27001 have recently gone through an update, and CMMC is going through a new release as well. The governing bodies, I think, are realizing that this rapid change of technology is requiring an adaptation in a lot of the outdated cybersecurity frameworks. And they're reflecting this current landscape of like cloud technology and SaaS tools into the controls and the requirements for the frameworks. So I think these governing bodies are really paying attention to the new technology that's being introduced and making those changes to the frameworks. Another thing that's really big in compliance right now is automation. Companies like SecureFrame are becoming a household name because of the changes that are taking place. And as little as 3 or 4 years ago, before all of these compliance automation companies, getting even SOC 2 compliant was nearly impossible for small businesses and especially startups. To prepare for the audit, there were no audit tools that organized controls and provided readiness guidance. What you did was you called an auditor and hoped that the environment was in good shape. The companies that could afford it would hire a consultant and pay for a readiness assessment. But most companies, especially small businesses, cannot do that. And then 3 or 4 years ago, audits were also much more expensive, reflecting the amount of work that the auditor had to do as part of that on-site assessment. Auditors were doing hours of evidence collection and multiple days on site, which was the norm. And without a readiness assessment, your firm couldn't really be sure you were actually going to receive a report or deal with months of remediating findings. So I think the automation in the compliance field has made it feasible for small businesses and startups to comply with frameworks like SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS. Overall, the audit cost has directly decreased due to the auditors using these tools like SecureFrame. They can now easily collect evidence, spend less hours with the client, and perform more audits overall. Small businesses now can easily understand the exact requirements of these frameworks when these platforms are providing readiness guidance in layman's terms, and companies no longer need a security expert or in-house compliance person to translate the compliance framework requirements into real actionable items. So overall, I think compliance is moving into a more technology focused landscape. And not only are the governing bodies changing the frameworks based on this new landscape, but there are tools that are being created to help organizations comply with these frameworks as well.
Yeah, I know when we were getting our SOC 2, it was hard to like decide, do you want this automated platform? Do you want to go with like a traditional auditor? Do you find that people are comparing you side by side, or people just know if they want a tool or a traditional approach?
Yeah, I've seen it a couple different ways where smaller businesses, really small businesses that have never gone through an audit before, they're basically Googling what is SOC 2, what is ISO 27001. And these platforms are coming up, and also word of mouth as well. I feel like the name SecureFrame is a lot bigger now than it was 2 years ago when we were at conferences just trying to tell people what we do. And nowadays, people are coming up to us and being like, hey, we've heard of this platform. So I think a lot of those small businesses that are going through compliance for the first time are seeing these tools can help them, and they're fully evaluating the tools, which I think is the way to go. Of course. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm biased, but of course. And then bigger companies that may already have an established framework where this is how they've been doing compliance for the last few years. This is the auditor we've been working with for the last few years. Adapting a tool and then importing all of that evidence that you've been collecting and the processes that you've been using seems like it's a tough one-time effort, right? But I have noticed, and at SecureFrame, we have dealt with mid-sized corporations that have gone through audits multiple times, right? And that one-time implementation in the tool saves them time year after year at that point, right? So I think, and we can even get into this a little bit later, but I think adoption of these tools is something that's going to be happening exponentially over the next course of the couple of years, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. And also, the last few years, so many platforms like that popped up, and not all of them are still there. So I think a few companies like SecureFrame and some others have started building the reputation around it now. So that exists, and you can trust the platform a little bit more than you used to. So I guess when it comes to compliance related security tests, when people are coming to us, we really see a lot of like checking the box. And we understand it, we know why it's there, but how do we get people to evolve from checking the box to prioritizing security the right way?
Yeah, I totally get it. Checking the box is a term that is widely used to discredit compliance as a security tool. And although I do believe that compliance is not the end all be all for security, I do believe it is a great framework for implementing security best practices for small businesses. So checking the box is not as demeaning as it really should be, because these frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO 27001, they require controls for risk and vulnerability management, change and access control, and things like data security configurations, such as encryption and key management. These companies without prior knowledge or expertise of what is considered security best practice, they can use the guidance of these compliance frameworks to understand what they can do to bolster their kind of non-existent security posture as it is today. And now that compliance security controls are in place based on these frameworks, these small businesses can now attest to the frameworks and prove to their customers and even potential prospects that they care about the data they manage and have the controls in place to protect that data. So I do believe checking the box is maybe the first step, right? Kind of
Yeah.
reading through those frameworks, understanding that, okay, this is a framework requirement. I need to implement this in order to check this box within the actual requirements list, right? But then at the end of the day, if they're checking the box for all of those requirements, they're low key building a security posture, right?
Right.
And then, of course, there are things that companies can do to kind of go above and beyond, which I think is what you were talking about when you were saying that companies should move on from checking the box, going above and beyond some of these security controls that the frameworks may require, just like the bare minimum to get by, right? But then it's that next step that companies should really be looking into. And these frameworks are generally templated, in my opinion. Proper security practices should really revolve around your particular organization. So, for an example, if you're an e-commerce merchant and you collect card data via a web application, it might be important to consider strong secure code development processes, right? It could be important to consider including like change management, developer training, application vulnerability scanning and analysis, all of these additional security measures that revolve around how you build this app and the security controls around the application itself. So the key is really understanding what's important to your organization. Now, that could be things like sensitive customer data, that could be the actual internal source code of your tool, like if it's a secret recipe or something like that. Or it could just be like the infrastructure or the platform that keeps the lights on of your service.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the first step to understanding how to go above and beyond these compliance security controls. It's really understanding what you need to protect. And once you understand what your critical assets are, that's when risk management comes into play. And performing a risk assessment will uncover like the most critical threats that can impact your service and your assets. Another example that I like to bring up is, let's say your employees are storing sensitive customer data on their workstations. Maybe that's part of just their process. And also these employees work from home, which is very common these days. And sometimes that means they run to the cafe a couple of times a week to work. But let's say they leave their laptop unattended and that laptop gets stolen. Now, since sensitive customer data is on that laptop, maybe the hard drive's not encrypted or there aren't other security controls in place, which could lead to a major security incident that was easily preventable. So in a case like this, it might be best to go above and beyond for workstation security controls, like MFA for login and hard drive encryption and things like that.
Yeah, and those are some good points. And people always ask, "What's required from SOC 2?" And it's like, well, it depends. What kind of company are you? Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's on us as leaders to not try to like cut corners in checking the box. Like, okay, what can I figure out that could get this box checked? But instead try and understand like why that box is there. And there's a reason that they're telling me I should have this risk management thing in place. If I don't have it, maybe I should implement it. And that's on leaders to really focus on why the box is there. And yeah, I'm all for boxes. I often equate it with seatbelts. Seatbelts are really important. We understand why they're there, but no one wore seatbelts until they made it a law. And then now everyone wears seatbelts. So it's the same thing with compliance and pen tests and everything. People really weren't doing what they needed to do to be secure. So we had to start implementing these guidelines to get everyone to at least the bare minimum. And then we can go from there.
Exactly what you're saying, right? These framework requirements are just a baseline, like a guideline. Understanding exactly what you need to implement, it really has to do with your organization and what you consider important, right? You mentioned pen testing. I feel like for SOC 2, the bare minimum for vulnerability scanning is maybe platform vulnerability scanning, and some sort of application security testing. But if your application is an incredibly critical part of your service, then I think you should think about implementing not only external vulnerability scanning like DAST scanning, but also internal like code security testing, and implementing these additional controls that go above and beyond what SOC 2 requires, but bolsters the security of what you consider incredibly important to your service. And then you bring up pen testing, which is incredibly important as well. You can implement all of these vulnerability scanning tools, right? You can run these scans monthly, but there's going to be that deeper layer of testing that needs to occur to really ensure that there are no gaps within these applications or these platforms that you consider incredibly important. How do you really know that these automated vulnerability scanning tools are covering your environment comprehensively? It really takes a penetration tester to go in there and review what ports are open, what services are open, are there any gaps here, and performing that vulnerability analysis and the exploitation of those vulnerabilities to really deep dive your posture. So going above and beyond, incredibly important.
Yeah, and not a lot of people know this, but Red Sentry, we originally started with just vulnerability scanning because we were like, you know what, that's the future, that's what it's going to be. And then as we were providing it to our customers, we realized it wasn't enough. We just needed to really get to that. So that's when we started our pen testing branch, and we equate it with like snorkeling and scuba diving. So vulnerability scanning is your snorkel. It's base level. You can see a lot. You can do it every day. Just grab your goggles, but it's not going to be that deep cave dive with the pen testers. So it's not like or, like it should really be and. They should work side by side together. But like you said, at least getting one of them and that bare minimum, and anything you get in place is a step in the right direction. So I guess relatedly to the future, AI is like a huge topic right now. How is AI kind of playing in the compliance world? Does it affect it?
Yeah, I absolutely think so, because AI is in the forefront of technology in general. Based on my experience, I'm seeing a lot of security tools embrace AI to help support the services that the tools offer.
Right.
For example, I'm seeing some SaaS tools, security code analysis tools, that use AI to read the insecure code and then generate a secure alternative or multiple secure alternatives. And in the past, these tools would just provide a templated remediation guidance. So, for example, if they weren't utilizing a SQL query correctly or something like that, the tools would probably provide some sort of definition in what they should do instead. But now what AI is doing is it's kind of reading that insecure snippet of code and then generating a potentially secure alternative. And I think the way that you can use AI in these tools is incredibly interesting. But there is a human element that definitely still needs to be implemented here, because that code that's generated by the AI, it definitely needs to be reviewed, because a lot of the times maybe the AI doesn't see the full picture, right? Maybe it doesn't have access to the entire repository. So the code that it's presenting could have dependency issues like across the entire board or something like that. So yeah, AI is definitely getting involved in a lot of tech, in especially security technology. But at the moment, it is still pretty new and does require that human element of review. I've also noticed that vulnerability scanning tools are doing the same thing, where like the AI can spit out a configuration that you can use to implement and mitigate a specific vulnerability that was found. Maybe using the proof of concept that was generated by that vulnerability scanning tool in the first place, which is really cool to see, because like I mentioned before, maybe these vulnerability scanning tools as remediation guidance, it would just be like a copy paste from like the CVE, which is incredibly general and is not specific for that specific vulnerability. But the AI does a pretty good job of understanding exactly what the proof of concept is. So maybe it has a lot of the function, it was able to pull a lot of it. And then based on whatever vulnerability was in that function, maybe spitting out some sort of alternative that the company could use. SecureFrame is also using AI with cloud remediation. So our AWS test, for example, will show you the exact like JSON for policies and other specific configuration guidance based on the information that we're pulling via the API. That way you can review that JSON that we spit out. And if it all looks good, you could just copy and paste that JSON directly into your AWS environment, which helps you implement a lot of these security controls way easier than reading through AWS vendor documentation, which is kind of the way that all of our remediation guidance is built today. Right now, we just have like screenshots of the console. We have that and supported by vendor documentation. But now using AI, we're able to read that information that we're pulling in via the integration and then generate, utilizing your resource names and everything that's coming from your instance, generate that specific snippet of JSON or configuration data that you can literally copy paste into your instance. So AI, it's definitely here for compliance as well, all trying to embrace it as much as we can.
Yeah, everyone's fearful of it, like rightly so. It's a healthy fear because obviously the malicious hackers, the bad actors, they're using it too, but they're using it whether we use it or not. So we at least got to try and keep up as the good guys and try and keep advancing in that. And over the next few years, I can't wait to see how it evolves. Like you said, we still need human elements right now, but in 5 years, might not. Really excited to see kind of where that evolves the next few years. So I guess relatedly to that, compliance moving forward in the future, where do you see compliance going over the next few years?
Yeah, I can definitely see compliance shifting to be a bit more adaptive and cloud focused instead of the way that it is now, which is way more generalized and templated. So companies these days are using many more managed services than ever, such as like infrastructure managed services, platform hosting in the cloud, all of these different sort of tools and services. I believe the governing bodies of these frameworks should be training their assessors against all of this new technology and how to attest that configurations are in place appropriately. And even more importantly, like the implementation guidance of these tools from the managed platforms are followed. I also think the guidance within these frameworks should be updated to allow for alternative controls in the cloud. So like before and even now, a lot of the compliance frameworks talk about routers and switches, which are these days being replaced with network gateways, VPCs, security groups, all of this cloud technology. And it's really up to the governing bodies to be on top of the technology changes instead of just assuming that auditors are assessing the right controls on behalf of like outdated requirements. So I definitely think that there's going to be a shift where, and PCI is doing this now, where there's an opportunity for these old generalized requirements to be met with new technology. And the thing is, auditors are being trained on how companies can meet the requirements to a T, whereas organizations are using tools and services to kind of meet them in a different way. So eventually I'm feeling that the guidance within these frameworks is going to be updated to kind of reflect the shift in technology. I also do think compliance automation is eventually going to be adapted by most, if not all, security assessors as well. I mean, the convenience of having a tool where all of the evidence is collected and then having customers that are well more prepared for the audit is a time and cost saver. Audits using a platform like SecureFrame are spending less time collecting evidence from customers during an audit and instead are reviewing all of that evidence well ahead of time. And this is the direct cause for all of the audit prices that have been going down over the last couple of years, being that the compliance efforts are more achievable for startups and small businesses. And also auditors can perform a lot more audits if they're spending less time on each customer. And the reason for that is because some of these platforms collect the evidence, make it a lot easier for the customers. There's support built in where we support our customers throughout the process. There's kind of built-in readiness as well. So the customers are well more prepared for the audit. Whereas back in the day, we would deal with a customer who maybe has never gone through an audit before, right? And they can't afford a consultant paying for a readiness assessment or anything like that. So we would schedule 2 weeks for this customer. The first week would be the on-site audit. We would go on site, ask them questions about all of these different requirements, and then realize they don't really have much in place. Or there's a lot of findings and there needs to be remediation that takes place. Then those customers would have to provide you additional evidence for that, right? So the whole first week is basically generating a list of open items for this customer. The second week is writing the report as best as we can, and then hoping the customer can remediate these items as fast as possible and then send us the evidence before we start stacking, because our next customer starts next week, right? So it's just stacking customers, following up with customers on evidence, previous customers, making sure that they're getting that information to us, and then getting the reports generated and sending them over. The old way of auditing was tough, but now that we can use these platforms to kind of organize the evidence, making sure the customers are submitting 90 to 100% of their evidence before the auditors even get access to the portal is saving our auditors a lot of time. They're able to jump in there, review evidence for the first couple of days. If there's any follow-up items, send those to the customer that week, right? And there's going to be a lot less follow-up items because these customers are dealing with personnel like me to help guide them through that process. Whereas before, customers were like Googling what PCI was, hoping they had things in place, and then having to deal with the auditor when it came time for the audit. So times have changed. And yeah, compliance in the future is definitely going to be using a lot of these automated platforms. But also, I think it's up to the councils to really adapt these frameworks for this future technology also.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's going to be a lot of updating, but I also come from the government sector, so I know how long it takes to change big things like that, but it has to change, like you said. And 5-10 years ago, small to medium businesses were so underserved by both of our industries, by compliance and by cybersecurity, because they just couldn't afford the solutions out there. But hackers are attacking small businesses like crazy right now. So the fact that we both focus on small to medium businesses, making sure that they're secure and that they can get these compliance frameworks, is something we really didn't see in the past. So I think over the next few years, as that continues, we'll see hackers kind of evolving their targets as well, because it's not as low-hanging fruit as it used to be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's the biggest benefit of what's going on these last couple of years. Like these startups and small businesses actually being able to effectively implement these security controls. And that comes down to a lot of the technology that they're using, right? So like if they're in the cloud utilizing AWS, there's a lot of self-guiding configurations, and using AWS config and all of these other tools, they're able to actually see if their implementation is indeed configured securely or not, right? And then using these platforms, driving down the audit price, making it way feasible for our customers to be able to get SOC 2 and ISO 27001 compliant. That's a group of companies that probably were not able to afford that 3 or 4 years ago, where auditors were charging an arm and a leg to come on site, perform these audits, and maybe you weren't even prepared at that time. So then audit pricing at my previous firm, if you did not provide a certain amount of evidence at a certain amount of time, right? So let's say the auditor goes through, performs 2 weeks of audits, and now you have 50 follow-up items. If you're dragging, you get charged additional money, right? So it wasn't very feasible for small businesses in the past. And like you mentioned, attackers, they don't care what size your business is. They care about what data you're getting. So if you're a small business that is processing card data or even transmitting card data or whatever the case, you're a target for attackers. Your low-hanging fruit, like your externally facing web apps, are security controls are in place. You're getting them pen tested regularly, which is another thing. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, it used to be, well, just go get a $70,000 compliance, get a $50,000 pen test, you just add it to the cart. It's just crazy to see how it's evolved the last couple of years. So I guess on that note, to leaders watching this right now that are thinking about starting in the world of compliance or cybersecurity or anything and kind of overwhelmed by just doing it for the first time, what would be your advice to them?
Yeah, I can see how compliance can definitely be overwhelming at first. All of these compliance requirements or compliance frameworks require a lot of different things, like proper scoping, detailed, complex controls to be put into place, regular reviews and tasks that you need to complete throughout the year, processes and policies to be created. There's just a lot of steps in order to be compliant. And if you don't have prior experience in these compliance frameworks or you don't have a team that can help, it definitely can be difficult. But nowadays, there are so many resources online. It's crazy. Most audit firms are pumping out blog posts and webinars describing exactly what it is to take in order to be compliant. And with the frameworks changing all the time, that makes it difficult as well. But a lot of this content that's being generated by well-known industry recognized firms online can help you understand exactly what these changes are that the frameworks are doing, and then also what it takes to be compliant. Nowadays, I can talk about SecureFrame all day, especially since we're on compliance, but these platforms make it incredibly easy for you to understand what's required, right? So PCI DSS has 12 requirements, over 300 different controls. Using a platform like SecureFrame, you could see all of those controls and requirements specifically laid out and directly reflecting your technology that you've integrated. So if you need to encrypt cardholder data throughout your environment and you integrate your platform, you're able to see every database, every file system, any sort of resource that could be storing cardholder data and which ones need to be encrypted. Things like key management, things like secure transmission of cardholder data over the internet. These very important security controls, platforms like SecureFrame will easily help you understand what needs to be put into place in order to meet them. I think having the resources online combined with utilizing a platform like ours and with the support like ours, compliance becomes something that is incredibly feasible. Just takes a little bit of time and effort on your end. But when it comes to actually understanding what is required and translating the complex PCI jargon that's in the report on compliance, you can leave that to us and we can kind of help support you through that journey. So yeah, I think with the tools, the technology, and of course, all the information online, getting compliant is definitely easier than ever. Building that baseline security best practice is easier than ever. You don't need to hire like a CISO and just to get started. I feel like nowadays you really just need to kind of do some research and figure out what tools will best fit your org and also what frameworks would best fit your organization, right?
Awesome. Well, appreciate you being here and talking through all this stuff. I know SecureFrame and Red Sentry both have a ton of blogs and stuff, like you said, about compliance and security and how it all relates to each other. So definitely check those out. Appreciate you being here today, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, Valentina, it was good chatting. Appreciate you having me on and looking forward to continuing our partnership.
Yeah. See ya. Thanks.
Bye.